Hello, you beautiful, beautiful people, and welcome to Wake Up. It's Friday, the 20th of February, 2026. And oh boy, do I have a show for you. Yes, indeed. And hello to everybody in the chat. I see everybody's very excited about Prince Andrew. Oh, no, he's no longer a prince, is he? About Andrew Mountbatten Windsor being arrested yesterday on his 66th birthday, and 6 cop cars came for him. There's not too much symbolism there, kids. How are you all? I hope you're well. Red-pilled Fox says, hello, fellow Polternites. Good morning to you all. Hello, Shin is in the comments. And Boaty McBoatface. Boaty McBoatface. Oh, my God, that's so interesting because I actually came across that name, Boaty McBoatface, to do with today's guest. More shortly. Thank you, Marcuson, our own force of nature, and you too, Poppet. Welcome to you all. And hello, Mario from Mexico, who contacted me yesterday and was so excited. Mario is an absolute star. He supported me, and he was so excited to hear the news about Andrew. Yes, indeed. Welcome to the show that knows you can apparently be saving the world and everything in it in front of the cameras, but behind it, you can have more sinister ideas indeed. Which brings me to this. There we go. How are you? I hope you are all marvelous and fantastic. This program today is taking on a titan, a behemoth, a living icon, a man who is so significantly revered around the world that to call him a national treasure is to severely underestimate how people see him. He's an international treasure, and woe betide anyone who disagrees. Well, that someone is me. It might even be you, because despite the almost exclusive adulation and fan worship this man has been blessed with for much of his life, very few have been prepared to critically appraise him. Well, that's what I intend to do today, and I do it without fear or favour. A few of my viewers suggested Sir David Attenborough, and frankly, it was too good to ignore. Fact is, if I didn't cover him, it would be entirely remiss of me given the length and breadth of his sphere of influence in several important ways. So, Sir David Attenborough, a man so priceless to the British establishment, they knighted him twice. So valuable to the captured institutions, he's been given 32 honorary degrees that we know of. Could be more, which means there's only 33rd to go. And then he's gone all the way, if you know what I mean. So incredible, actual species have been named after him. And if that is not the clear sign of the type of human arrogance I'm going to be covering over the next hour or so, I don't know what is. He was originally famous for his broadcasting of animals in their habitats. Brilliant, fascinating work, giving us insights into nature that was both a great pleasure and at times highly traumatic. He was and still is a wildlife documentarian, over 100 documentaries under his belt, a conservationist, in fact, the foremost advocate of nature conservation. And then something happened and he started saying things that were out of sync with his previous self, or so we thought. He became a climate change fanatic. The world was on course for a catastrophic future, he said to everyone who would listen. Humans are approaching a crisis. It's not fun. It's a huge impending disaster that we have to face, he said. On the surface, and without all of that stuff, I should have like and support Sir David Attenborough. He appears to love our natural world and the animals and creatures in it. So big thumbs up from me. Oh, that's great, isn't it? But bear in mind, this is the image that has been carefully cultivated over decades in order to make acceptable the unacceptable. Because as I learned, when you dig deeper, you realize a friendly face has been put on some frankly atrocious spin. And it's not for the public good. It's not even for the good of nature. It's for the good of people like Sir David Attenborough. His great altruism and beneficence in the world hides the fact that he thinks that there should be much less of us. That's right. Depopulation. And in fact, I'm going to turn to that great scribe monkey on X who reminded me of the most perfect quote this morning from David Attenborough. And it is, instead of controlling the environment for the benefit of the population, perhaps we should control the population to ensure the survival of the environment. And that is a perfect quote, because as you will see, as we start to unfold his journey, you will see that it has absolutely been driven by his desire to depopulate this wonderful world of ours. And there it is, really. I discovered this is, frankly, it has driven much of his output. And in later years, he's become much more militant about the message before he leaves this mortal coil. He'll be 100 in May. That's right, 100 years old, okay? And he talked last year about how he doesn't have much longer left to live. Despite this, the BBC announced yesterday that they will be running a series of programmes to honour the great Attenborough. Of course, disclaimer, of course, when I talk about the dark side, I am not alleging criminality against any of the people that I choose to cover. I'm just shining a spotlight on the sides of these people that need to be shown, and in the correct context, rather than through the prism of first-rate public relations. This man has been a leading light in pumping out propaganda since the 1950s. And his influence over our national conversation cannot be underestimated. It absolutely cannot, which is why it was absolutely right that I cover him today. How are you all? How are you all? I hope you are well. Trinity says, people don't realize how much empty space there is on the planet. We are not overpopulated. We're just bunched up. Exactly that. And I'll talk about it. I absolutely will. DJ Darkside wants to know if any of these people aren't complete frauds. I don't know if I can answer that accurately for you. So David Frederick Attenborough was born on the 8th of May, 1926 in Isleworth, Middlesex. And he lived on the campus of University College in Leicester, where his father, Frederick, was a principal. He came from a sort of socialist liberal background. His mum was working with refugees. There were three sons. David is the middle son. His older brother is director and actor Sir Richard Attenborough, now passed. During the Second World War, though, through a British volunteer network known as the Refugee Children's Movement, his parents also fostered two Jewish refugee girls from Germany. And they took in these little sisters, and they became little sisters to David and his brothers. And the family fostered Helga and Irene for 7 years after it was discovered that their parents had been killed. And therefore, even though they don't come from a Jewish background, they grew up alongside two Jewish sisters. And David Attenborough was very much informed by the humanitarian stance of his mother. But as I say, very much a socialist liberal background. And quite interesting stuff as well. In recent years, I think in 2020 rather, he reunited families of his Jewish refugee sisters, and again, quite heartening stuff. But of course it would be, because this man has been documented, as I say, for actually 70 years, at least 70 years, and always with the halo of a saint around him. But when it comes to the Attenborough family, I actually think that the expression champagne socialist was probably invented for them. And, or at least the two famous ones, both Lord Richard and Lord David have sought to use the screen to create change rather than just entertainment. The problem about the pair of them doing that is that entertainment can quickly become propaganda, as we know. And in history, the Attenboroughs are the people that statues are dedicated to. People who have had their names attached to good deeds, even though there may be numerous other people involved in those good deeds who do not get named. So Lord Richard Attenborough, who died in 2014, stood, we were told, for humanitarianism, social justice, and the arts. And he believed that cinema should be a tool for enlightenment and social change rather than just entertainment. He was a lifelong member of the Labour Party. He used his platform to advocate, we were told, for progressive causes. But of course, as we know, we live in an inverted world. So what people like them call progressive causes aren't necessarily what we call progressive causes, or indeed are progressive at all. He served as a life peer in the House of Lords. How very socialist of these people. And he frequently spoke about the vital role of arts in society. David Attenborough was educated at a grammar school in Leicester. He won a scholarship to Clare College in Cambridge to study geology and zoology. And in 1947, he was called up for national service in the Royal Navy and spent 2 years stationed in North Wales and the Firth of Forth. And David Attenborough himself has not been averse to politics. In 1998, Attenborough described himself as a standard, boring left-wing liberal. And he was one of 200 public figures who were signatories to a letter to The Guardian expressing their hope that Scotland would vote to remain part of the United Kingdom in the 2014 referendum on that issue. Prior to the 2015 general election, Attenborough was one of several celebrities who endorsed the parliamentary candidacy of the Green Party's Caroline Lucas. Well, I doorstepped Caroline Lucas. She's a pretty hopeless individual. Given that they are the Green Party, they've never acknowledged the impact of geoengineering on their drive to do with climate fanaticism. And the same with David Attenborough, I should say. And in an interview in 2020, Attenborough criticised excess capitalism as a driver of ecological imbalance, stating the excesses the capitalist system has brought us has got to be curbed somehow, and that greed does not actually lead to joy, although he added that doesn't mean to say that capitalism is dead. No, it's not dead because it's been live and well in your pocket, mate, for rather a long time. And in 2021, Attenborough told the leaders of the 47th G7 summit that tackling climate change was now as much a political challenge as it was a scientific or technological one, and urged for more action. Attenborough also stated that we are on the verge of destabilizing the entire planet. In 2023, Attenborough was described by the New Statesman as a figure invaluable to green diplomacy in the UK, placing him 23rd in their list of Britain's most powerful left-wing figures, above many elected politicians. So it's important to understand straight off the bat that this man did not come into television with clean hands. Okay, clean hands means value-free, that no kind of biases or any of that kind of stuff. But these people come from an absolute leftist background, and so it was a leftist agenda that he and his brother were promoting on the big silver screen and on the TV screen. And it's the overarching system that is destabilizing this planet, says Vendetta. Shug said politics is a disease, the reason that everything is wrong. Indeed, couldn't agree more. So, like Stephen Fry, he's a national treasure, but with bells on. I mean, he's even more of a national treasure than Stephen Fry. Whereas many people actually can see an issue with Stephen Fry, as I discovered after doing a deep dive into him last week, there are far less who see any problems at all with Sir David Attenborough. And as said at the start, he is loved worldwide. And like Stephen Fry, he has not been averse to flowery sentiment here and there in his drive to be ever earnest, ever genuine in his sentiment. When he was controller of BBC Two, yes, he was indeed the controller of BBC Two, more about that shortly, he permitted the destruction of early TV tapes to save money. They used to reuse the tapes. And this included that of acclaimed pet playwright Alan Bennett. Years later, when asked about the destruction of these tapes, Attenborough described it as a scar on my conscience. Very flowery, very theatrical, such clever wording. You end up feeling sorry for him. That's the thing. And like Stephen Fry, he's another one who has benefited, of course, from posh privilege. Nepotism has also helped him. Being one of the famous Attenborough brothers has increased his value exponentially. So as said, let me see if I've got another image of him that I can just bring into the mix. I will shortly. As said, he's 100 years old this May and more beloved than ever. And, BBC, massive plans. It's going to be huge plans all around because everybody loves him, apparently. Everybody. So take that how you wish, okay? The corporation will mark Sir David's extraordinary milestone on the 8th of May with a week of special programming featuring new and old shows by the beloved presenter. Those are the words from a BBC report, by the beloved presenter. And that will include Life on Earth, which was first broadcast in 1979 and followed Attenborough as he travelled to 40 countries to film 600 species. Jack Goodall, head of commissioning for Specialist Factual at the BBC, said it's impossible to overstate what Sir David Attenborough has given us. His programmes have not only defined science and natural history broadcasting, but they have also changed how we see our planet and our place within it. This special week is a celebration of an extraordinary milestone and of a body of work that continues to inspire awe, curiosity, and care for the natural world. It's also a moment for all of us at the BBC to say thank you to David for his generosity, for his brilliance, and for a lifetime spent bringing the wonders of nature into our homes. You know, people do love celebrating this man. Oh, yes, indeed they do. And none more so than a bunch of sycophants who came together for an Ask David video for his 99th birthday. And that included like establishment suck up David Beckham. It included Dame Judi Dench. It included Billie Eilish. And it was kind of around the time that he released his feature-length film Oceans, and he said that he is now approaching the end of his life. These days he spends much of his time at home, Richmond, which is the same borough that I live in. He's resided in the same house in Richmond, southwest London, for decades, a place he considers his favourite place in the world. And I can tell you that the borough of Richmond is truly a beautiful place to live. It really is. We have the best of both worlds. We're kind of like on the edge of the country and we're also on the edge of the city. We're kind of, you know, sandwiched in between, and it is wonderful, absolutely wonderful. And he is very close to Richmond Park. He's served as a patron there. He's been a spokesperson for its wildlife and conservation. And Richmond has always been very handy for the BBC, which was down the road in Shepherd's Bush for decades before it centralised operations to central London. And for decades, David Attenborough, a former channel controller, is widely seen as the living embodiment of the BBC. And frankly, has been able to make any programme that he wants. His power and influence at the BBC is sort of beyond compare. Beyond compare. I mean, if I even began to list all the programs, all the books, all the events, all the documentaries that this man's name has been put to, I would be here all day. So I'm not going to do that. But I'm going to just give you a kind of brief overview of his work at the BBC. So after his stint in the Navy in 1950, he applied for a job as a radio talk producer with the BBC. He was rejected for this job. His curriculum vitae later attracted the interests of Mary Adams, head of the talks department of the BBC's very fledgling television service. He himself at the time, like many people, did not have a television set, had not seen much TV programming, but he accepted Adams' offer of a 3-month training course. And in 1952, he joined the BBC full time. He became a producer for the talks department, which handled all non-fiction broadcasts. His early projects included the quiz show Animal, Vegetable, Mineral, and Song Hunter, a series about folk music presented by Alan Lomax. In the 7 decades since, he has fronted dozens, if not hundreds, of iconic series filmed and broadcast around the world, helping to earn him the status as one of the world's most respected and influential science communicators. And Attenborough's association with natural history programs began when he produced and presented the 3-part series Animal Patterns in the 50s. And the program was kind of like studio bound, and it featured animals from London Zoo. That probably should have been a clue that this wasn't an animal lover, right? When you start featuring zoos. But hey, we were also, well, I wasn't even born in the 50s. But, you know, the truth is that many of us have been subject to so much brainwashing about this man that when people talk about kind of animal lovers, a lot of people automatically say David Attenborough. But as I go on, you will see that couldn't be further from the truth in many respects. I'm not here to just smear people. I'm here with facts and evidence. Okay, so let's continue. So what happened was that they did this kind of interview with London Zoo, and Attenborough met Jack Lester, who was the creator of the zoo's reptile house. They decided to make a series about an animal collecting expedition. Leave them in the wild. No, let's bring them to Regent's Park in central London because you're animal lovers, right? Anyway, the result was Zoo Quest. It was first broadcast in 1954, where Attenborough became the presenter at short notice due to Lester being taken ill. So we are told that his start really as a presenter for nature broadcasts was as a consequence of the man who was supposed to be doing it taken ill. And that's possible. That happens. But he was not just behind the camera or in front of it at the BBC, but he was also managing it at one stage. He served, as I say, as controller of BBC Two and director of programming for BBC Television in the 1960s and the 1970s. And I think this is the point when we now start to see where some of his ideology comes from, because in the early 1960s, he resigned from the permanent staff at the BBC to study for a postgraduate degree in social anthropology at the London School of Economics. Now, the thing about the LSE is it's a Fabian school. It was started by Fabians, and it was here that much of his attitude towards the world's population would have been honed. And before he finished his degree, he accepted an invitation to return to the BBC as controller of BBC Two. And he became controller of BBC Two in March 1965. In 1969, he was promoted to director of programmes, making him responsible for the output of both BBC channels. This man has had tremendous influence over what you and I have heard and seen over the last 70 years. It's incredible. And when Attenborough's name was suggested as a candidate for the position of Director General of the BBC in 1972, he phoned his brother Richard, and he said he had no appetite for doing the job. And what ended up happening was early the following year, he left his post to return to full-time programme making, leaving him free to write and present the planned natural history epic that was underway. And after his resignation, he became a freelance broadcaster and started work on his next project, which was a trip to Indonesia with a crew from the Natural History Unit. It resulted in the 1973 series Eastwards, which was similar in tone to the earlier Zoo Quest, and the main difference was the introduction of colour TV. And in fact, it should be noted that David Attenborough is the only person to have been awarded BAFTA awards in black and white, colour TV, and in HD. Interesting. And after his work on Eastwood, he began to work on the scripts for Life on Earth, probably one of his most famous series. And due to the scale of his ambition, the BBC decided to partner with an American network to secure the necessary funding. And while the negotiations were proceeding, he worked on a number of other television projects, such as Tribal Art and The Explorers. He presented a BBC children's series entitled Fabulous Animals, which featured these kind of incredible mythical creatures such as mermaids and unicorns. So not wishing to mislead children too much at all. And eventually the BBC signed a co-production deal with Turner Broadcasting. Ted Turner, another man who has said much about protecting the planet and has done none of the sort. I think it's Jane Fonda's ex-husband. Anyway, Life on Earth then moved into production in 1976. And one of the producers who has worked with him over the years, marine scientist Dr. Charlie Verone, said that it got to the point that David was, I'm paraphrasing Dr. Charlie Verone here, but it got to the point where David was so powerful that he could do whatever he wanted. That when they were out on productions, he ignored what producers wanted. He says what he likes. He doesn't listen to producers. He's completely in charge and in control. Now, anybody who's presented anything, including myself. Did some work for Channel 4, my earliest work for Channel 4 to do with an AIDS production. And I can tell you that they stage manage every step of the way. But because he's all powerful and because he'd come from a background of running the BBC, the people at the BBC, the minions, the producers, the camera crew were frankly terrified of going up against him. So they never argued with him. They never disagreed with him. And, you know, this tells you about his importance within the corporation and outside of the corporation. And he's been having some great opportunities from a very, very, very young age. Who wouldn't have wanted to travel the world fully paid for a chimp to drape their arms around you? But how well were these animals treated? And some insight into Mr. Attenborough's lack of understanding, I'll talk about a little bit later. I'm not the only one. And he has a number of critics, and there are some blatant examples where it has become absolutely apparent that this man, frankly, knows diddly squat at times about animals. But hey, his name is on the can. His name is on the can. He's BBC royalty, Mel's. End of story. That's why. No, you don't just have a week of celebrations for somebody who isn't BBC royalty. You're absolutely right. That is exactly what he is. So he's so important that species have been named after him. Plant life, butterfly. A butterfly was named after him. I'm not even going to be able to pronounce it, but it is the Uptachia Attenborough. Uptachia Attenborough, that's it. And there was a dragonfly named after him. There was a long goblin spider. There was a smiley face spider. Who decided that David Attenborough should have all these species, including plant life, named after him? A species of Ecuadorian flowering tree. I wonder what the Ecuadorians feel about that. And Pickles says butterfly, Freemason. We will get to Freemasonry, Pickles, I can assure you. And even parasites from deep sea fish have been named after him. A Madagascan stump-toed frog was named after him. Stumphia David Attenborough. And one of only 4 species of Echinida has been named after him. Thunderous One said Attenborough is just a script reader. Let me just go there. Who has been marketed as your reliable uncle, nothing more. Absolutely, they do love that, don't they? That whole kind of big family thing. And Dillip said he didn't discover them. No, he didn't. He absolutely didn't. So why the arrogance of thinking that they should name species after him probably tells us rather a lot. Okay. So in terms of awards, oh my God, multiple. I couldn't even begin to tell you them all. His first award was likely around about 1972 when he received the Royal Geographical Society's Medal and Award. In 1974, he was appointed Commander of the Order of the British Empire for services to nature conservation in the 1974 birthday honours, 1980 BAFTA Fellowship, 1981 Kalinga Prize for the popularisation of science from UNESCO, you know. Elected a Fellow of the Royal Society in 1983, Knight Bachelor in the 1985 birthday honours. It goes on and on. Elected Honorary Fellow of the Royal Academy of Arts, Q International Medal, Member of the Order of the Companion of Honour for Services to Nature Broadcasting in the 1996 New Year Honours, International Cosmos Prize, RSPB Medal. So many. I can't begin to read them all. In 2019, he received the Indira Gandhi Peace Prize. He has received, and the same year, he received the Crystal Award at the World Economic Forum in Davos, Switzerland. Guess who else has received that Crystal Award? David Beckham, another arsewipe, Stephen Fry. These are all establishment people being awarded. That's the bottom line. And in 2020, awarded the Knight Grand Cross of the Order of St. Michael and St. George. And 2021 Lifetime Achievement Award for Champions of the Earth. It goes on and on and on. The establishment love to award their shills. I said it. I said the word. And what I said before, 32 honorary degrees that we know of. These honorary degrees recognize, we are told, his lifelong dedication to documenting natural history for the BBC and educating the public. But how much education have we really been subjected to? And I mentioned that he received a second knighthood for his work in the natural world. He was knighted by two members of the royal family. There he is with his mates. They're very, very close friends. He was very close to the Queen for a very long time. And he was knighted in 2022, most recently by King Charles, but he was first knighted by Queen Elizabeth II in 1985. And then Charles gave him the 2022 honour. Essentially, even though they call it a second knighthood, what it is it's an upgrade. So he's like the top of the knighthood tree. That's what he is. And the thing is about David Attenborough, indeed the Attenboroughs, is they've been at the top of the food chain for a very, very long time. So it's okay for him to go all around the world, pontificating around the world on BBC expenses and more. But the reality is that these people have probably never had to do like a serious hardcore day of work in their life. And certainly nothing manual. I think he's kind of like that person. He arrives, he decides how he wants to do things, and then they film. And that's kind of the bottom line. But he's also what I would call a national keeper of secrets. So in 2019, he was presented with the prestigious Chatham House Prize at the Royal Institute of International Affairs in London. He was presented this by the Queen, who is a patron of Chatham House. Now, you may or may not be familiar with Chatham House. There are the Chatham House rule. So this is the thing that it guides Chatham House. The Chatham House rule is a system for holding confidential high-level meetings that we are told encourages open discussion on sensitive topics. And it dictates that participants may use information from a meeting, but they cannot reveal the identity or affiliation of the speaker or any other participant. It originated at Chatham House in 1927, a year after David Attenborough was born. And we are told it ensures a safe space for honest exchange. Actually, what the Chatham House rules actually does is ensures secrecy around matters of public interest. And the Queen was patron there for a very long time, and she absolutely adored David Attenborough, adored him. And I'm going to read you some of her speech on giving him this award. She said, "Your ability to communicate the beauty and vulnerability of our natural environment remains unequaled. As patron of the Royal Institute of International Affairs, I am delighted that members have awarded this year's Chatham House Prize to Sir David Attenborough and the Blue Planet 2 team. Sir David, the award recognises your many talents, and one can't help but feel that for those of us of a certain generation, we can take great pleasure in proving age is no barrier to being a positive influence." Imagine Queenie saying that age is no barrier to being a positive influence. You're the bloody Queen. What did you do in your time there? And then she goes on to say, "Your ability to communicate the beauty and vulnerability of our natural environment remains unequaled, as you and your team have engaged and infused many people, young and old, to appreciate and preserve our world's oceans. For that, we should all be thankful. I congratulate you and all involved in this endeavour." So here's the thing. The Queen and the royal family only enjoy the natural world so long as they can hunt it, kill it, and hang it as a trophy. These people should be kept as far away from the natural world as humanly possible. And so I don't think it's any great shakes for the Queen to be saying that about David Attenborough. Or in fact, is it an insight that he conducted himself in a way that the bloodthirsty royal family would appreciate? I would have to say yes, indeed, I would. And here's just an image from a recent video that I did, Royal Bloodlust, just to give you an idea and set you up nicely for what is about to come, frankly. And so, yes, he received the Chatham House Prize, and he has been a major royal family propagandist. I probably don't need to tell you this. You've probably seen him on numerous occasions, on TV screens, on radio, in newspapers, with the royal family, talking about the royal family. He's even been at WEF with the royal family. So he is absolute propaganda for the establishment, the crown, and the climate hoax. And he's done numerous documentaries with members of the royal family. He did the Queen's Green Planet. And it was, we were told, this is the PR bump. It said, in a rare opportunity to see the Queen talking informally to Sir David, the conversation ranges from climate change to conkers and birthday gifts. And it also included Prince Harry planting trees in the Caribbean, Prince William and his family in Canada's Great Bear Forest. And the project was originally conceived by veteran Labour MP Frank Field, Frank Field, I don't know if you remember, but he'd attempted to change the face of the welfare system, and he was very much part of New Labour. And he wanted to do this project, and he tried to get governments to do something to link the rainforest together in the Commonwealth, and nobody was interested at all. And he said the Queen jumped at it. I mean, it's extraordinary. I think she saw it as a way of a new politics for the Commonwealth. And in a trailer for the documentary, David Attenborough is seen telling the Queen, this will be a wonderful legacy. Yeah, but a lying legacy. I mean, a lying legacy. It really is just ridiculous. It's like me representing ballet dancers. Right? Just wouldn't happen. Just wouldn't happen. Right? So why on earth is the Queen representing our great and wonderful green planet and conservation when these people have destroyed parts of our planet, have destroyed the animals in their natural habitat? Absolutely awful, pure gaslighting. And his relations with the royal family runs deep. I even made a little chart just to get you up to speed on it. There you go. There's some of the imagery of him. Goes back a long way. And from one outdated and outmoded British institution to another, frankly, for decades, Attenborough has been famously entwined with the monarchy, supporting their environmental causes and working with them on various media projects. But this is a really deep relationship. This is personal and professional. Him and the Queen, they went back a very long time, and they've done things together. Like, so what he's done is he's put some kind of veneer of respectability over the fact that these people are bloodthirsty, animal murdering oiks, right? So one example, at the 2016 Tusk Conservation Awards, these people have been known to go off and shoot exotic animals, trophy hunting, right? But Prince William was at the 2016 Tusk Conservation Award. He lauded Attenborough and told the audience, there is one person here tonight who has done more than almost anyone else to play his part. Someone who has literally gone to the ends of the earth to showcase the beauty of our planet's wildlife and the critical need for us to preserve it. How can you say that when you are bloodthirsty and murderous of animals? See, this is what we've been fed. We've been fed this glut of PR so that they talk out both sides of their mouth, right? The reality is what they say is not how they live their lives. That's how they want us to live our lives, but they don't want to do that. And because, frankly, it's unlike William and the other royal oiks who have gone to the ends of the earth to carry out their multiple blood rituals on numerous animals, including actual blood rituals. In one investigation, I covered how Prince Harry talked about how the nanny had said to him when they'd killed an animal, I can't remember what it was, it might have been a deer, a stag, I think it was, and said, look, put your hand in the wound, pull out, all the stuff, smear it over your face. These people are psychos. It's important to remember that. They should be kept away from animals. That Attenborough claims to be so much about animal wildlife and conservation, yet has maintained a very long relationship with the hunters in the royal family, is just one part of showing up the hypocrisy of this man. Another is the fact that he eats animals. Now, I'm not attacking anyone who does that, right? Each to his own. I don't, but I'm not a born-again meat eater, a non-meat eater rather. It's like that's not my role to be telling people what they should or shouldn't do. However, I will criticise someone who has spent the British licence fee money on acting like Lord Bountiful of the natural world while still eating them. Sod that. David Attenborough, it is a fact, helped Queen Elizabeth carve out her legacy. Throughout her 70-year reign, Queen Elizabeth II underwent this kind of incredible transformation. And all the while, she was leaning on allies like Sir David Attenborough, who helped make decisions regarding her public image. He was very influential in that. In 1969, there was a documentary about the royal family, and the aim was obviously to normalize them as much as possible and make them appear like us. And the Queen had decided on this. And but in Ingrid Seward's book, Ingrid Seward has documented the royal family a lot, another establishment suck up, these people always are. But in her book, The Queen and Di, The Untold Story, she revealed that Attenborough felt the documentary would spoil the mystique of the royal family. And according to Seward, actually, what he'd said is, "You're killing," to a BBC executive, "You're killing the monarchy, you know, with this film you're making." So, really important to understand that even from as early as 1969, we have some understanding that this man's role was absolutely to uphold the British establishment. And who is at the top of that food chain? The royal family. The royal family. It's the head of the snake. Okay. And he was so concerned that the royal family, that the monarchy would be damaged. He also has been involved in producing the Queen's Christmas broadcast for BBC. And he was also involved in choosing her outfits, as one example that we know of, at least. The Queen was having some difficulty selecting an outfit. It was a room with green wallpaper, and she was uncertain what to wear. He picked out something that was mushroom color. He said that the Queen came out of the rackety old lift and said, "I hope you approve of my costume." And so that tells you these people are tight. I mean, who gets to select the Queen's outfit, right, for the Christmas message? David Attenborough. He's a part of the royal family without having been born into it. And it goes back, as I say, a very, very long way. Here he is. This is 1959. This is David Attenborough with his pet bird, Cocky. And it's a cockatoo. And he introduced Cocky, the cockatoo, to then Prince Charles and his younger sister, Princess Anne. Of course, Prince Charles is now King Charles. So it goes back a very long way. And he said about Prince Charles that he saw very clearly the relationship and the importance of the natural world right from being a small child. Well, as anybody knows, Charles has been interfering in conservation and ecology for a very, very long time. Royal family aren't supposed to get involved in politics, and he's been writing letters forever and a day to politicians. And if I genuinely believed it was for the good of the planet, I'd say absolutely get involved. But I don't. I don't believe that any involvement of the royal family when it comes to our natural world is a good thing, because we've all seen what they do. Remember, they're bloodthirsty. And so very clearly from a very early age, he was in there. And the duo also worked together on a number of other projects as well. And he's been working with the Queen, like I say, forever and a day. Let me bring this back to the stage, him and his relationship with the Queen family, the Queen, Queen Elizabeth II. In 2016, Queen Elizabeth II rang in her 90th birthday. To celebrate the occasion, Buckingham Palace hosted 3 days of festivities, included a parade, a street party, and lots of public appearances. And David Attenborough took to the stage to deliver a special salute to Her Majesty. He read part of an essay by children's book author Michael Bond, who shared his own reflections on turning 90. And during the BBC programme Attenborough at 90, Prince William raved about his admiration for both Attenborough and the Queen, his grandmother. They are two incredible national treasures who have done so much over the years. I mean, again, insufferable arrogance, right? Like describing your own grandmother as a national treasurer, has done so much over the years. She was the queen. She could have done so much more. Believe me on that. She sat there, she took up her role, and that was that. And like David Attenborough, somebody mentioned in the comments earlier, like he's the nation's uncle. Well, the queen was portrayed as the nation's grandmother because, of course, she's just like us, right? Just like us. On the Queen's death, he issued a statement reflecting what a great privilege it was to have known her. She was an expert at getting people to relax, he said. Tell that to her servants. He said, when you met her, you were well aware that you were in the presence of someone who was extremely important to our society. Well, only by dint of being born into a certain family. And he said, and yet she made it seem that you were meeting another human being with exactly the same conditions that all human beings have. Well, because that's the fact. Away from all the glitz and the glamour and the multi-million-pound crown, she's just a human being. That's it. But you see, people like David Attenborough boosts up the royal family because it in turn boosts him up. So he's, the thing is, but a lot has transpired since Queenie has died. But David Attenborough is very, very close friends with King Charles. And a lot has transpired over the years since they first met with the cockatoo. And David Attenborough, as you would expect, was at the King's coronation. Prior to that, he was all over TV having conversations about the King and about the King's environmentalism. And the conversation was with BBC's Kirsty Young. And the conversation was that as a prince, it was a little bit more acceptable for the king to be involved, the prince to be involved in kind of like pushing politicians to do various things. But Attenborough was quite clear that his attitude was that even as the king, Charles would continue. And no doubt about it, because we've seen that. Anyway, we've seen that. And but David Attenborough's relationship with the royal family is a multi-generational thing, from the Queen and Charles to Prince William and Kate. And William and David Attenborough have embarked on a number of projects together, actually. I wonder if I can just find this. I might not be able to. But here it is. Let me just, this beautiful background, beautiful scenery. I mean, that's the thing. Always bear in mind, these people is that they can afford fantastic productions and all that. But this is an image from WEF in 2019 in conversation with Prince William. And William has paid tribute to David Attenborough on numerous occasions. I mean, that's stunning scene, isn't it? Absolutely stunning. And so, as I say, William and Attenborough have embarked on a number of projects together. One of their earliest encounters occurred in 2012 when they teamed up at the opening of a new research centre at the National History Museum in London. Then in 2019, William paid tribute to Attenborough during the commissioning of a new Arctic research vessel, which aptly became known as the RRS Sir David Attenborough. And I say aptly became known because by this point, there was nobody else. In the same way as when advertisers talk about footballers, they'll still invoke the name of like David Beckham because these are establishment names, right? David Beckham, by all accounts, fairly decent footballer, but not genius level. I could be wrong, not a football fan, but nonetheless, really, David Beckham really made his name by him and Posh Spice teaming up together and becoming this power couple, and then going all over the world and doing all this stuff, fashion and other stuff. But it's the same way with Attenborough, is that anything to do with nature must feature Attenborough in the UK, and it's bloody irritating. And so what they did was they named this Arctic research vessel the RRS Sir David Attenborough. And actually, I referred to Boaty McBoatface earlier in the comments because, and I don't know where you got it from, it might have been that, but when they had the vessel and the British tabloids were kind of like the British public were giving it this name of Boaty McBoatface. Anyway, William's speech said, "You have shown us how awe-inspiring the natural world is and also how fragile and endangered it is." It's fragile and endangered because you are, as I said, bloodthirsty, murderous people, right? That's why it's fragile and endangered, literally, because of people like you. And he goes on to say that they decided to call the vessel the Sir David Attenborough because of all the things that David Attenborough had done. Now, it should be noted, this image, by the way, as I say, is from WEF 2019. A lot of controversy that I want to talk about at WEF and about the issue of backroom deals. But before I get there, I want to just mention this, and I will mention it again later when talking about the Epstein files. But William, of course, has been involved with the Earthshot Prize, and in 2021, Attenborough and William came together to produce the Earthshot Prize, repairing our planet. I mean, the insufferable arrogance of these two people, it's just unbearable. When I was compiling all this and researching, I just had to keep taking breaks. I just felt so nauseous. I absolutely loathe entitled, overprivileged people. It's my working class background. Maybe I've got a chip on my shoulder. I don't care. I think these people are insufferable, and I think that they've been given far more than they need or deserve. Anyway, so the Earthshot Prize, which is mentioned in the Epstein files, and so they had created this 5-part docuseries, and it explored the goals and challenges, we were told, of building a healthier, more sustainable planet. And William's children, propaganda for the next generation. During C19 in 2020, William's children, Prince George, Princess Charlotte, and Prince Louis, teamed up with David Attenborough for an informative chat about wildlife on Zoom. And in the video, he answered the kind of Royal Brood's questions about biology and the environment. And he also gifted the eldest royal child, George, a special gift, a 23 million year old megalodon tooth. I literally have no idea how they know these things. How do you know it's 23 million years old? But this is how things go down, isn't it? And then they get repeated. Anyway, but that's what they said. They said it was a 23 million year old tooth. And the royals said, so David found the tooth on a family holiday to Malta in the late 1960s, embedded in the island's soft yellow limestone. Now, after 2002, it was illegal to remove any fossils from Malta. But some critics were enraged by Attenborough's gift to George. They were like, this is not okay. That's like 18 years after. But remember, he'd collected it in the 1960s. And because of that, and because it was David Attenborough, the kind of hue and cry fizzled out. And also Catherine, Kate Middleton, as I still see her, and but Princess Catherine, as many people would call her. She didn't recently. She first met David Attenborough in 2013. They were a screening of Attenborough's film Natural History Museum Alive 3D, and in early 2020, she met with a group of school children via video chat. And one youngster wanted to know who was her favorite celebrity, and according to her, it was David Attenborough. David Attenborough was her top choice, and it would have to be. And the reason I say that is because she's embedded in the royal family, right? So she can't say anybody who's actually genuinely doing something radical, like David Bellamy, but I'll get to him shortly, although he's no longer with us, sadly. And in 2005, a TV reviewer in The Times described Attenborough as the most trusted man in Britain. So when did David Attenborough switch from cuddly lover of exotic animals? I even made a little chart of that. Look at those beautiful pictures. Impressive, right? The question is, what did it take to get them? That's the question, right? So, but before we get to there, when did David Attenborough switch, as I say, from cuddly lover of exotic animals to climate change zealot? Well, it appeared to be around 2004. He said he had an epiphany about climate change in 2004, because up to that point, never really made a big issue about it. He talked much more about animal wildlife, about nature, about conservation, actually fairly decent stuff. Although with the benefit of hindsight, you can start to see how he was his agenda of depopulation was informing his TV output. You can see that now. But sometimes it takes a period of years, even decades, to really realize what people are up to. So anyway, he said he had this epiphany. 2004, sorry, if I said 2005, it was 2004. He went to a lecture, and it was a lecture with an American scientist, the late Ralph Ciccarone. And the bottom line is that Mr. Ciccarone convinced David Attenborough somehow that the evidence was beyond argument, and that the climate was warming up exponentially, that global warming was a terrifying prospect, that it was going to destroy our planet and all the people in it. And so suddenly he had this kind of Damascene conversion, right? And he wrote in The Independent in 2006, I was skeptical about climate change. I was cautious about crying wolf, but I'm no longer skeptical. Now I do not have any doubt at all. I think climate change is the major challenge facing the world. I have waited until proof was conclusive that it was humanity changing the climate. The thing that really convinced me was the graphs connecting the increase of CO2 in the environment and the rise in temperature with the growth of human population and industrialization. Now, there is some truth in that, obviously, but it's not the position that Attenborough takes, as you will see. And he talked about the coincidence of the curves, made it perfectly clear we have left the period of natural climatic oscillation behind and have begun on a steep curve in terms of temperature rise beyond anything in terms of increases that we have seen over many thousands of years. Well, not everybody who actually has some knowledge agrees with him. And one person who absolutely fervently disagrees with him and his approach to climate change is one Paul Burgess of the channel Climate Realism on YouTube. Paul has been with us a number of occasions, and Paul very kindly let me record him yesterday and saying a few things about David Attenborough. And Paul Burgess, if you're not familiar, he's a Bachelor of Science and a Master's of Science. He's a retired chartered water resource engineer and a retired chartered environmental engineer. So already equipped to be critiquing David Attenborough. He built his first climate model back in 1970. He has as I say, the Climate Realism channel on YouTube with nearly 300 videos on climate, net zero, and the madness of it all. His recent scientific paper explains every single year's temperatures since 1982, accurately dispelling all the alarmism. And when kind of mainstream was still prepared to have Paul on their platforms, there's several brilliant interviews on GB News where he's up against Jim Dale, an absolute climate alarmist, and Paul is there with just like all the facts, and Jim Dale is getting increasingly flustered because he doesn't. The problem is when you have all the evidence like Paul Burgess does, and when you've done the work, right, somebody like a Jim Dale or these kind of climate change zealots, they just fail. Right. So I would highly recommend that if you have the opportunity to check out Paul on GB News, even if you think GB News is garbage, which it is, it's really great to see him on there. He is a keen environmentalist, and he even sailed with his wife in a boat across the Indian Ocean, across the Atlantic Ocean, and across the Pacific Ocean. This is a man who has traveled. He even sailed through the claimed Pacific plastic garbage patch so he could see for himself that it doesn't exist. Now, that is one of David Attenborough's lies, which we will get to, because this is a man who I will call a climate change pornographer. But before we get to that, this is a brief word of what Paul had to say in his opening about David Attenborough.
Well, he originally, he's a biologist, isn't he? And originally he was. I mean, he's a genuine person who made his name going around the world, greeting grillers and all sorts of things. And so on that side, on the animal side, he was absolutely superb. But he started to extend himself and got onto very dangerous territory. And as a result of that, he's done an awful lot of harm. I think the most harm almost to children. So when I see him walking with the king in the gardens at Buckingham Palace, chatting about climate change, it really is annoying because he really doesn't know what he's talking about. But when it's pointed out, the worst thing is not that even, because lots of people do harm. But the worst thing is that when it's pointed out to him that he's wrong, when you give him the evidence that he's wrong, he doesn't say sorry and put it right.
And we are going to get to that. And somebody in the comments says, is it geo and chemtrail denial of it? And that's an important point, which I will address later. Absolutely, I will. But I want to continue on the climate change porn because it's interesting stuff, right? So to all intents and purposes, David Attenborough was a late adopter of this extremely strong position. And as I say, it happened after he'd seen this American scientist who had convinced him that the climate was warming up exponentially and we were in danger of extinction, essentially. So he had previously admitted to being skeptical of the science until later in his career. He wasn't ever a denier as such. But he just kind of like kept back. He kind of kept back. But then he kind of came all out, and then there was absolutely no stopping him. And he was telling us in no uncertain terms that our greatest threat in thousands of years is climate change. He warned that we've reached a pivotal tipping point where inaction will lead to, in quotes, irreversible damage to the natural world and the collapse of our societies. And he advocates for rewilding and protecting nature. Well, we've seen some problems there for a start, because in these rewilding projects, they've been buying up farmland, okay, to rewild these areas where you can't farm on them. But that creates its own problem for the food supply, right? It does. And what I should also say is that he's a real big pusher at the idea that the UK is in the most perilous state when it comes to the climate and conservation. That's a mantra that he pushes on a constant basis. And but he says, obviously we need to cut emissions. And there are a number of other things that he suggests. So he's made a ton, as you can imagine, of climate fear documentaries, including Climate Change, The Facts, which is kind of like a look at the science, we are told, of global warming. It explores potential solutions, the consequences of inaction, then, of course, a life on our planet in 2020. He does these kind of witness statement documentaries, which details the decline of biodiversity during his lifetime. And then Our Planet for Netflix 2019, a series that specifically highlights human impact on ecosystems, which really departed from his earlier, more idyllic wildlife portrayals. Huge departure. And honestly, it was literally like something had happened, some sort of exchange had taken place, because he just flipped. He flipped, and it was noticeable. I also really resent how at the COP, which is kind of like the International Climate Change conferences, at those COP ceremonies, certainly in Glasgow in 2021 and in Katowice, I'm not sure where that is, in 2018, but on both occasions, he's served as a people's advocate and represented the people's seat. Now, the point about the people's seat is it's supposed to be a representation of what the public are saying. But David Attenborough does not represent the public. He represents the establishment. So again, this is a man. Poland. Thank you, Dilip. Thank you. You're right. It is Poland. Absolutely. Thank you. Reason became a sir. Oh, right. Okay. So yeah, so he doesn't represent the people. He represents the establishment, but he gets given these people's seats and to be given the crown of like a people's advocate. Anyway, over the last decade or so, well, a couple of decades now, he's ramped up the climate alarmism like a good little boy who had received a friendly word from the type of people who could make or break him. And honestly, David Attenborough, you cannot have survived the BBC without being prepared to be compromised, right? And but he's continued to issue really alarmist statements on a regular basis about the threat posed to the world by climate change. Climate Change, The Facts, again on the BBC. He outlined the scale of the crisis, and it is really dramatic stuff. He said, in the 20 years since I first started talking about the impact of climate change on our world, conditions have changed far faster than I ever imagined. He said, it may sound frightening. That's the plan, mate. It's fear porn. But he said, it may sound frightening, but the scientific evidence is that if we have not taken dramatic action within the next decade, we could face irreversible damage to the natural world and the collapse of our societies. Dear me, dear me. He also talks about how we are running out of time. There is still hope. He said that we need to better understand the threat we face, and blah. And so for 2 decades now, Sir David Attenborough has been at the forefront of efforts to move the dial on climate change. So presented a load of documentaries, been able to do exactly what he wanted. Remember what the producer said, that when David Attenborough makes a documentary, he ignores what producers want because he has so much power. So he can do exactly what he wants. And that is not always for the good, as we will hear. And of course, one climate zealot must meet another climate zealot. And from a different generation, of course, but nonetheless, a climate change zealot in the shape of Greta Thunberg. And the pair first met via Skype in 2019. They were discussing climate change, of course, and carbon footprints. And it's so hilarious because this pair travel all over the world while telling the rest of us to reduce our carbon footprint. Absolute ridiculous. Drumstick yes. And they both noted their absolute mutual respect for each other. Attenborough noted that Thunberg had achieved in a short time what campaigners like himself had failed to do for 20 years. Boop said, don't get me started on Thunberg. Well, she's just a David Attenborough for a different generation. I mean, that's it. They share the same goal. They say that the environmental crisis remains a critical, immediate threat, and climate crisis, and yada, 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 yada. And it goes on. And what I really object to is she also interviewed him for a BBC Radio 4 Today program in 2019. She appeared in his work, the documentary A Year to Change the World. That was 2019. So that's 6 years, a year to change the world. And that's what I really hate about these people, right? I hate these climate change pornographers. They are absolutely disgusting. They create a climate of great fear and unhappiness. It's unforgivable what they do. I do not care whether it's a 100-year-old man or a 20-year-old, whatever, how old she is, young woman. I don't care. They are propagandists. Jan said she was just a rich kid who they used to influence the young people. Now she's outgrown her purpose. Yes, she's moved on to the next one, hasn't she? She's now Gaza, isn't she? But bottom line is the pair of them are much of a muchness. And that is, both of them are publicity hoes and love that very much. And they've both been used for the climate change agenda by big industry. That is a reality. Now, obviously, you don't get to be David Attenborough without many critics, as you can imagine. And I want to start talking about the unreliability of him and the problems that come with a David Attenborough. In fact, not a David Attenborough, the problems that come with David Attenborough. As I say, he's widely regarded as a trusted voice, but he has faced criticism for being too slow to address human impact, focusing too much on individual actions rather than kind of like systemic change. And again, like Stephen Fry, he's full of big flowery words, big overarching ideas. Never really get to drill down with these people. That's the problem. And he's also, without a shadow of a doubt, misrepresented specific causes of environmental disasters. In fact, I would go so far saying, I'm not the first person to say that David Attenborough has categorically lied to advance the disaster porn that he's now heavily involved with. Categorically lied. One of the tactics that he's used is to shift responsibility to populations, right, rather than kind of individuals, because we can all play our role. I don't deny that we've done some horrendous things, right? All kind of like plastic bags in seas and stuff like that is horrible. we definitely should get rid of all stuff like that, without a shadow of a doubt. And that's the kind of stuff that I supported him. And actually he proved to be very influential and very powerful in those respects. Except, of course, we ended up with a situation where shops would no longer give you carrier bags, and then you had to pay for them. So it was still the same result, except we now have to pay to pollute the planet. It's absolutely ridiculous. Andrew said, how so? More than 1 billion years of CO2 release within is going to affect climate. Climate has been forever changing. It has been forever changing. The climate has never been stable. That is a reality. But we are not on a course of disaster. Everything that I've read, everybody that I've talked to, I'm in no doubt whatsoever that we are part of a very expensive hoax. And you may disagree with me. But that's the beauty about around here. But lots of people know that he has been part of a campaign to terrorize unnecessarily people. That is the reality. And the fact is that a lot of the stuff he does is really emotionally draining, but it's just kind of politically empty. And it's like, it's very, he captures very tragic happenings. And so you get very visceral reactions from it. And I'm going to talk about the falling walruses, which you may or may not know about shortly. I'm going to talk about that, but other things that he has blatantly lied about. Although he wouldn't necessarily say that he lied about the walruses, but we're going to get to that in a minute. And part of the point about his programming is to evoke emotional responses, but they absolutely lack clear, actionable focus. That's a reality. There are also numerous inaccuracies in his documentaries. In 2018, it was noted that the Africa series that he did incorrectly attributed a situation to climate change. A further scenario, again, which I'm going to talk about, he also attributed to climate change, and that was a lie. So he has this apocalyptic messaging and not many solutions for it. And many critics have suggested that his environmentalism has been flawed by failing to adequately address how capitalist, how industrialization and imperialist systems drive ecological destruction. He does this big thing of, capitalism is bad. We need to control it and everything. But it's, again, big, overarching, flowery descriptions. And many defenders, such as the person in the comments, they argue that criticism of him is unfair and that the true failures of his programs and the inaccuracies lie with the BBC editors or politicians who have failed to act. And hilariously, another climate alarmist, George Monbiot, is a big critic of Attenborough. And some of it is valid and what I already have discovered. And in a Guardian article in 2018, Monbiot went so far as to say David Attenborough has betrayed the living world that he loves. And he talked about how David Attenborough had said that fully representing environmental issues is a turn-off. And Attenborough had this new series called Dynasties, and it mentioned the pressures affecting wildlife. But Attenborough himself had admitted that they played it down. He said that he didn't want to proselytize. He didn't want to be alarmist. So that he didn't want to be alarmist about the dangers to animals in the environment, but he is happy to be alarmist about climate change. Don't know about you, but I have a problem with that. And when he talks about, George Monbiot said that when he talks about climate change and his work on it has been a total disaster. He said that he shifts the blame from powerful forces onto either society in general or the poor and weak. And sometimes it becomes pretty dark. Well, he is a tool of the establishment. So who else do you shift the blame on? You don't sit at WEF and blame the people there because they're part of your camp. So you will blame people in, I don't know, the Mumbai ghettos or wherever. That's what you do. Like, for example, in 2013, he told the Telegraph, what are all these famines in Ethiopia? What are they about? They're about too many people for too little land. We say, get the United Nations to send them bags of flour. That's balmy. So you can see how his great desire to depopulate the world has informed his work. Unquestionably. WWF, yes, indeed. SMG, got that. Yes. Attenborough is alive. Or do they use an AI clone? He's celebrating his 100th in May, and the BBC want you to know it. And also, I think this is also interesting as well, is that one thing that I discovered, the closer that I looked at him, is that he's very, very selective in who he attacks and what he attaches himself to. And he's kind of failed to stand up to animal abuse in the UK, including the hunting lobby. And, you know, you get people like Chris Packham, for example, who has stood up to the hunting lobby and has really been treated very badly. And I don't always agree with everything Chris Packham says, because he's another climate alarmist, but at least he stood up to be counted. And Attenborough hasn't always done that. And as I say, driving much of this is his attitude to depopulation. He is the patron of the organisation All Population Matters. And again, on the surface, I should really support this, because I do believe that all population, including animal, wildlife, sea life, etc., all matters. I believe that. And I do everything I can to be as kind and compassionate with animals as I humanly can. Sometimes that's difficult, but that's what I try to do. But Population Matters, it's a UK-based charity and advocacy group which is dedicated to achieving a sustainable human population to protect the natural world and improve quality of life. And they address the impact of population growth on environmental degradation, on resource depletion, and climate change. And it always comes back to climate change for these people. And their vision is a world where humanity lives fairly and sustainably with nature and each other. The mission is to confront the impact of human population growth on environmental destruction and promote solutions that improve individual lives while protecting the planet. And All Population Matters strategy, the title of their 2025 to 2030 strategy plan, which emphasizes the interconnections between human population growth and the survival of all species. I think we know where we're going here. And a quote from him for All Population Matters as the patron is, "All our environmental problems become easier to solve with fewer people and harder and ultimately impossible to solve with ever more people." So again, his drive to rid the earth of us essentially is apparent in everything that he is involved in. And so that is a reality. And it is also a reality that many so-called animal lovers and environmentalists are big on depopulation. But are they also eugenicists? That's the next question. Because do you remember Jane Goodall, chimp lady Jane Goodall? She was also big on depopulation. And David Attenborough advocates for voluntarily curbing human population growth. He says to reduce environmental impact. He warns that continued rapid growth is unsustainable for the planet. Well, you're not going to be here for much longer anyway, right? And but he's pushing very much for it. He has, as I said at the start of the show with the quote from Monkey, I think the quote was about a plague on Earth, wasn't it? Which obviously that tells you a great deal. It described humanity as a plague on Earth. And he said that we will soon be unable to feed or house itself if growth continues unchecked. Now, the reason why there is a problem with poverty in this world is because the haves, like your friend, the royal family, have too much while the rest of us have too little. And I don't include myself in that. I do not have too little. I have more than enough. I have an abundant lifestyle and I'm very, very fortunate. Okay. And so are many people. So are many, many people. But there are still people who are starving in this world as a consequence of the greed of the kind of people that David Attenborough has spent his entire life cozying up to. That's the reality. And in fact, it was interesting, right? In 1979, he visited the People's Republic of China. He reported to the West for the first time about the Chinese one-child policy. And I am sure this would have interested him plenty, maybe even informed his views on depopulation. Pretty sure about it. And he bangs on endlessly. If we don't limit our population growth, the natural world, in the natural world, we have to limit our population growth or nature will do it for us. Well, so let nature do it for us then, if that's the case. That's the same BS argument that they use in culling deer in my local park, right? my local park, like Richmond Park, in the same borough, every year for about 4 months, they cull stag, and they say it's to stop stag overrunning, right? It's a lie. It's to make money. I issued a Freedom of Information request one year to find out how much money they made from selling the deer meat. And if I remember correctly, it was £37,000 in 1 year. So I don't believe in culling animals, full stop. Right? I really absolutely don't. I think that's absolute arrogance. And I certainly don't believe in culling humans. I really don't. And he talks about how we are a plague on earth. It's coming home to roost over the next 50 years or so. It's not just climate change, it's sheer space, places to grow food for this enormous horde. He said, either we limit our population growth or the natural world will do it for us. And the natural world is doing it for us right now. And what? Let it. And but, you know, the reality is people like him have for a very long time wanted less of us on the planet. And the reason I talk about eugenics is because the Fabian Society, George Bernard Shaw, who was part of the formation of the Fabian Society and the London School of Economics, which has clearly influenced Attenborough, is very much about depopulation, but also about eugenics. And eugenics is about kind of like the best of the breed. Okay, so my feeling is David Attenborough's problem is with poor people. If only we could have less poor people, because poor people bring with them a whole horde of problems. They are dependent, they are needy, they need our assistance. And every now and again he tries to sound super cool, and he's like, what are we going to do with the next billion people and everything? But he talks about kind of like feminism and how the straw of comfort and hope is that wherever women are given political control of their bodies, where they have a vote, education, appropriate medical facilities, and they can read and have rights and so on, the birth rate falls. There's no exception to that. And but haven't we been told that we have a fall in population? So it's like it doesn't add up, does it? And he puts a great deal of emphasis on women's reproductive rights and empowerment. He believes in providing universal access to birth control and education, and all of that kind of stuff I agree with. Yes, I absolutely agree with, but not for the same reasons as him. He wants it because he wants less people to populate this planet. Now, where would I be without mentioning a man who I have and retain respect for in this murky world? And it's this man, David Bellamy. David Bellamy is no longer with us. And David Bellamy, a botanist, very famous one, household name. And both David Bellamy, both David Bellamy and David Attenborough, the two Davids, were dominant figures in wildlife broadcasting during, the kind of like last century, the last part of the last century. And Attenborough became world renowned, as I say, for his wildlife series. Bellamy became a beloved figure through shows such as Bellamy on Botany and Bellamy's Britain. And a lot of people found David Bellamy much more grounding, much more earthy, much more real, much more genuine, much more authentic than the establishment face of Attenborough. That's the reality. But they were household names, both of them. They even had collaborations. They had differences later, but originally they did collaborations together. They worked together on environmental causes. They both participated in the Galapagos Conservation Trust. They jointly launched the Durham Wildlife Trust appeals in the 1980s. Both received the BAFTA Richard Dimbleby Award. A bit odd, isn't it, that David Dimbleby, not Dimbleby, no, I'm confusing them. I'm confusing the Dimblebys with the Attenboroughs, ignore me. But both received the BAFTA Richard Dimbleby Award for their contributions to factual television. Bellamy in 1978 and Attenborough in various years across the decades. And then they had a divergence of opinion. And this is when things started to get interesting, because David Bellamy started to express significant skepticism about the growing climate lobby, the climate change lobby. And he famously dismissed global warming as poppycock in 2004. And he later said that that stance led to him being shunned and frozen out by major broadcasters, including the BBC, which effectively ended his television career. Conversely, of course, David Attenborough became one of the world's leading voices for climate action. Now, isn't it interesting that 2004 was the key year when it all happened, when David Bellamy said, "This is poppycock." And yet in 2004 was apparently when Attenborough had his epiphany that climate change was a real thing. Or had he spotted an opportunity where he could finally knock out his competitor? I'm being cynical because I think that a character like Attenborough deserves some cynicism. He's not been subjected to any cynicism. Poppycock, Randy. Poppycock is an English expression for like nonsense. That's what it means. And that's what he was saying. And then David Bellamy went on to give a couple of interviews after that. I think one of the last ones was in 2013. And he said absolutely that his very successful TV career was caused by his views on climate change. And but the reality is that if he hadn't have said that, he would almost certainly have been revered in the same way as David Attenborough is. And what was really sad, what was really awful, was that he was deserted by his fans, he was shunned by his peers, he was ostracized by broadcasters and conservation groups that once loved his endorsement. He was sacked as president of the wildlife trusts. And I think it was really painful for him because the very few interviews that he gave before his death, he talked about it. He said, and I'm going to quote him directly, "All of the work dried up after that. I was due to start another series with the BBC, but that didn't go anywhere. And the other side, ITV, didn't want to know. I was shunned. They didn't want to hear the other side." And then when he was asked in 2013, "But do you still believe that you're right?" He said, "Absolutely. It is not happening at all. But if you get the idea that people's children will die because of CO2, they fall for it." And that is the reality. And what we have, of course, now is forecasters from the Met Office who appear with these charts, blood red charts, to scare the life out of us for temperatures that are, oftentimes lower than they were 10 years ago, when they are illustrating with these blood red charts. And that's because these Met officers are aligned with WEF, the World Economic Forum, and what they desire under the UN Sustainable Development Goals, of which Attenborough is a big advocate and pusher, as I will talk about. And it's awful for David Bellamy. He actually said, "Someone emailed me to say I was the worst paedophile in the world, saying I was killing children by denying global warming." And that is the problem that you have to encounter when you deal with climate alarmists like Attenborough. When you dare to be the other side questioning it, people attack you. And that's the reality. And he talked about David Attenborough. He said he was on our side at first, but then he had a change of heart. Yeah, he had a change of heart. And was it really that epiphany moment when he listened to an American scientist, or was it, as I suggest, him saying there's an opportunity there? My arch rival has made a blunder, is about to make a blunder, because that wasn't the first time that Bellamy had said anything, but it was in 2004 it really came to big public attention that he was talking about it being poppycock. Yes, Humphrey, exactly like that. David Bellamy talked about how nobody wanted to be near him, including the World Wildlife Fund, who made documentaries with David Attenborough, but none of them, they just all distanced themselves from him because they were all part of the same thing. They wanted to push the climate crisis agenda, and he didn't fall into that. And then in 2005, the Royal Society of Wildlife Trust, as I say, ousted him as a president. That must have been so painful. When you're a David Bellamy and you've done as much as you can to raise awareness to our countryside, to natural habitat, and then because you're not following the agenda, you then get ousted and you get treated, in such a repugnant way. It's awful, horrendous stuff. And of course, where we're up to now is we have Ed Miliband, a failed former leader of Labour, tried to become prime minister, but was so duff it was just impossible. And he's now in charge of net zero at the government. And there is very much a drive at the moment that anybody who questions climate change narrative should be punished. Now, he's said that he's not asking for us to be punished if we question it, but some of his kind of acolytes are. He says that people who question climate, this is Ed Miliband, says they are anti-worker. He's accused opponents of net zero agenda of trying to import a culture war regarding climate action. He's pledged an annual State of the Climate speech to the House of Commons. Now, we had Paul Burgess on recently talking about the millions of pounds that is being wasted to actually essentially to bankrupt British taxpayers. And here's Paul again. I think I've got this is right. Let me just see if I've got the right one, where he just briefly talks about government lies. Let me just bring that in. I think this is the correct one. Let's give it a shot.
She's doing on the climate with it to the economy, which is all collapsing. It really is. The damage is incredible. I mean, now we're into full-blown lies from the government, you know, telling us the price of this and the price of that. Total lies, black and white, not even beginning to be near the truth. And he's with all of that, which is causing damage to everyday working people, besides the children I've talked about. And I don't know why he does it. I mean, but he has some extreme views, it seems, and fine. But if people were allowed to challenge him, or when he was shown to be wrong, he'd admit he was wrong, that would be a big breakthrough, you know. But it's a nice man gone off the rails, in my view, because I've always admired him until he wouldn't admit he was wrong. And he is wrong all the time on the number of species. We've now got more species alive today than ever in the world's history, right? Ever. I mean, things like that aren't known to the kids. They think everything's dying off. And they don't see it in balance. But people like Bellamy, who speak out, honest people, they're cancelled. They lose their income. They lose everything. We're in a world of fear for speaking the truth. I'm retired. I'm 81. And most of my life I've run my own businesses. So I haven't had to worry. I've been a boss.
And that is the reality. They hate the Bellamys of this world. They also hate the Paul Burgesses of this world. That is the reality. And yes, we are. There was a good comment there. We are being taxed into poverty, he said, what's normal? And that is the reality. We are. And for these very, very poor agendas. And of course, a lot of this is WEF inspired, World Economic Forum. And, you know, to kind of return to Attenborough's relationship with King Charles, then Prince Charles. If you remember, in June 2020, Charles partnered with the World Economic Forum to launch the Great Reset. And Attenborough was very much involved with that. And the idea was about rebuilding the global economy more sustainably in the wake of COVID-19. Yeah, the economy that they crashed so that we could have the largest transference of wealth in my lifetime. The row of shops at the top of our road was so busy during 2020. We were all shopping there. And since then, 6 have gone bust. They were small independent shops. They've gone. It's done. It's over. And that is because of the transference of wealth to obviously people like Jeff Bezos and Amazon and that sort of stuff. And that's war. People like Prince Charles and the WEF back. That is the reality. And so the Great Reset was exactly that. The initiative was launched by Charles and then Klaus Schwab, who obviously ended up leaving WEF under a very dark cloud with allegations, which were later found to be unfounded. But nonetheless, he was founder of WEF, and they did this virtual roundtable on June the 3rd, 2020. And the Prince of Wales talked about his Sustainable Markets Initiative and Build Back Better and all that sort of stuff. They were reimagining capitalism, sustainability focus. They talked about golden opportunity. And the initiative was presented as a culmination of Charles's over 50 years of advocacy for sustainable, environmentally friendly and nature positive practices. The thing is, these people never walk the talk. Before Charles became king, he was in charge he was in charge of many rented properties in the Duchy of Cornwall and other areas. And the rental properties were in a terrible state of repair. They were not being sustained in any way, shape or form. And in fact, it turned out that Charles was a slum landlord. So these people, they bang on these big stages on WEF, but actually in their own corners, they're not taking care of the world at all. And of course, the Great Reset, it faced tremendous, significant criticism because many people realized this is about, depleting our society and then building it back so that it benefits these parasites. And they like to talk about how it was misrepresented, but it wasn't at all. There was huge corporate influence around the whole Build Back Better. Remember, now they don't talk about it. They even denied it at one stage, right? Until it was, it's like shown that there was books written about this, about building back better and the Great Reset. So the role of King Charles cannot be underestimated when it comes to Attenborough. Okay. And just because Charles is now king, he has not finished with his activism. No. And David Attenborough believes that Charles will give conservation full backing. And he was talking prior to Charles's coronation, of which, of course, Attenborough was at. And he was talking about it, and he was talking about his relationship with the king and about celebrating his own 99th birthday. And of course, Charles very famously turned up at the premiere of Attenborough's film Ocean documentary premiere last year in May 2025, because they're very, very close, extremely close. And Attenborough was in no doubt. He told BBC that even once Charles became king, he would absolutely continue his activism. And so that's really where we're at. The royal family are not supposed to get involved in politics, but this is Charles. And the interviewer, the one BBC interviewer had said to him, and I referred to it earlier, said campaigning prince was one thing, but the constitutional parameters change when you are the monarch. And Attenborough said, and then the interviewer said that will Charles be able to, that Charles will, he felt that Charles would be able to say less about the environment, to be less active on that front. That's what the interviewer said. And but Attenborough was like, no, I believe he will. He's going to continue because he knows he's been propping up the establishment for a very, very long time. He's practically a member of royal family himself. And that is the reality. So Charles is far from being a king of the people. Charles is, as we knew anyway, he is in his own right an establishment whore, an establishment shill. They've done a number of things together with the royal family again in recent times, the UK People's Plan. I do want to refer to the Davos in 2019, though, because I think that is really important. The People's Plan, by the way, with the idea was to inspire the UK to create a People's Plan for nature. It is, again, very much about lobbyists and money. And in 2021, the Natural History Museum's Biodiversity Intactness Index put the UK in the bottom 10% of countries worldwide and the worst in the G7 for biodiversity. And that's what I said, is that they've repeated this as a mantra. Bellamy has also talked about how the UK is one of the most nature-depleted countries in the world, with a quarter of its mammals at a risk of extinction. And yet we still allow the royals and their bloodthirsty mates to kill off our wildlife, to kill our foxes. Come on now. These people don't do joined up talking. And so, yeah, they did that. But I want to. So they keep repeating that mantra that the UK is the most depleted. In fact, another one that they use is the United Kingdom is one of the most nature degraded countries in the world. We're losing species and habitats at an incredible rate. What about the issue of geoengineering? See, they don't mention that. Okay. And I find that problematic. And that was an issue that I've taken before with Paul Burgess. I mean, although he does acknowledge geoengineering, but not chemtrails kind of geoengineering. But it is a significant issue, and they just fail to acknowledge the role that geoengineering has had on our wildlife and on our environment. And that's clearly very, very problematic. And obviously, as I say, I want to return to, I want to talk about some of the porkies that have been told in order to further these agendas. But given all this and what I've had to say, he's obviously a supporter of the UN Sustainable Development Goals, which was originally intended for 2030. And now, because we're failing to be, good boys and girls and not following orders, they've now extended it to 2050. And the thing about the UN Sustainable Development Goals is it's great on the surface. I mean, it is magnificent on the surface, right? It looks as if it's all about kind of equality and equity and taking care of impoverished people and building up our environments. But actually, in reality, when you start to drill down on it, it's about enslavement of humanity. That's is essentially what we're dealing with here. And there are 17 sustainable development goals, and it is absolutely at the cost of people living in the world. He's a key advocate for the Sustainable Development Goals. He advocates for cutting emissions, removing carbon from the atmosphere, holding global temperature rises to account. He highlights the ocean as the lifeblood of our home, stressing the need to protect it from pollution. Now, it's those things that I agree on. You see, the thing is, this is where it can get really tricky, of course. And a lot of people don't bother to go, well, I agree with him on A, but not on B. But I do, because I think when you accept him wholesale, you realize that his depopulation agenda informs his climate crisis fanaticism. And so actually the environment gets really lost in all of this. And there's so much that he's had to say and that he's been rewarded for to do with the UN Sustainable Development Goals. He's been rewarded repeatedly by the UN in Nairobi. At the UN Environment Programme, they announced that he was the recipient of the Champions of the Earth Lifetime Achievement Award. He has more Lifetime Achievement Awards than you can shake a stick at. And again, he repeated there that climate change is humanity's greatest threat in thousands of years. So that's just alarmism, and it's problematic. And he also talked about, if we stand a chance at that event in 2022 in Nairobi, he said, if we stand a chance of averting climate and biodiversity breakdowns and cleaning up polluted ecosystems, it's because millions of us fell in love with the planet. Sorry, this is what it was said when they were introducing him. It's because millions of us fell in love with the planet that he showed us on television. And this was Inga Anderson, who was the executive director. And he said, Sir David's work will continue to inspire people of all ages to care for nature and to become the restoration generation, except some of it was a lie. Alarmist and misleading information about the natural world to push his agenda. One person who has called him out is Patrick Moore. Greenpeace's ex-president called him an absolute liar to push his climate change agenda. And what Paul Burgess was referring to, and what I referred to in what Paul Burgess had done, where they'd gone through this area to look at the so-called plastic that Bellamy was talking about. And another big critic of Attenborough is Dr. Susan J. Crockford. She's a professional zoologist. She's got more than 40 years experience, including work on the Holocene history of Arctic animals. She's an author. She has a fascinating science blog about polar bears. And she has written a number of books, and one of her books is Fallen Icon, Sir David Attenborough and the Walrus Deception. Now, you may or may not be familiar with the Walrus Deception. One example, actually, before I get to the Walrus Deception, I want to show you this. I hope I've got an image which is already here. Let me just remove that because I need more images. This is still Dr. Crockford, but I want to show you a fat polar bear, and I'm not body shaming this fat polar bear, but this is one example of what Dr. Crockford uses as David Attenborough using animals to promote his climate alarmism while the visual evidence is there for all to see. So in the climate change episode of his 2011 BBC programme Frozen Planet on Thin Ice, he told viewers that polar bear mothers and cubs across the Arctic were starving because climate change was melting the sea ice. And as Dr. Crockford points out, he was sat beside a fat, healthy Barents sea female when he said it. And they talk about how this polar bear was sedated for the cameras. Now, I've not been able to back that up, but that is the claim. But the polar bear looks sedated. That polar bear doesn't look as if it's fully there, right? But you know, as Dr. Crockford pointed out, has anyone bothered to tell him that Norwegian biologists have finally admitted that Barents Sea polar bears were actually fat and healthy in 2010 when they assisted in the filming of his BBC documentary? Or did Attenborough know even then that this population of polar bears was thriving despite the large loss of sea ice, but let his viewers think otherwise? This was taken on Svalbard, which is the Western Barents Sea, likely in the spring of 2010. But that polar bear looks out of it, which is hardly the image that people associate with David Attenborough. Hardly the image. That photo is wrong, Renegade Sound. Absolutely wrong. But it's interesting to hear they're well fed. Well, this is somebody who actually specializes in polar bears. And she's there saying this man is a liar. And in order to fulfill his climate alarmism, he has to tell these lies. And of course, remember, it's a depopulation agenda behind his climate alarmism. It informs it all. And honestly, he's shameless. That photo is all wrong. Peter, absolutely, a wild polar bear would not be like that. Absolutely not. And the reality is that David Attenborough, even with imagery like this, was still one of the most trusted and admired men in the world, said Dr. Crockford, until early 2019 when he narrated a joint Netflix WWF documentary called Our Planet. Now, what it showed was walruses falling off a high cliff. This is available on Netflix. I don't know if it still is, but I remember seeing it and I cried. I cried like a baby to see. I feel emotional now, actually. It was so devastating to see these walruses falling off a cliff. And we were told that it was because of the use of fossil fuels. Viewers were traumatized, children were traumatized. And but the reality is that it was based on a lie, desperate to prove that climate change was responsible for both human and animal deaths. And in order to actually create a full-on propaganda plan, he's literally used misinformation and then refused to address it when it was discovered. And Paul Burgess talked about this, and I'm going to let Paul Burgess tell you about the walrus incident, and then I'm going to show you some footage which backs up what Paul Burgess is saying and what Dr. Crockford is saying. But essentially what happened was Attenborough indicated that the walruses had been forced to gather in large numbers on the rocky shore around the cliffs because of the disappearance of the Arctic sea ice on which they would usually congregate. And that resulted in these walruses falling down these cliffs, and you saw them, and then you saw all the walrus bodies at the bottom of the cliff. It was horrible. It was horrible, horrible stuff. The footage was filmed in Russia in 2017. But as I say, here's the kicker. These incredibly emotive scenes did not happen for the reasons that he said so. So I'm going to play you what Paul Burgess says happened, which is accurate and is corroborated by Susan Crockford's account. And then I'm going to show you the actual footage. And I think you're going to be fairly horrified. So this is what happened.
Oh, we're tumbling down a cliff. And
Right.
the polar bear.
Start that. So
yeah, he featured it in a program where you saw the walruses coming off the cliff. Oh, we're tumbling down a cliff, and the polar bears eating them at the bottom. And there they were, lots of them coming over the cliff. Yeah, and he said, you know, it's so bad that they, because of climate change and the lack of breeding grounds, they've had to, and the island he was talking about had a beach, and then gradually the beach sort of extended up high behind to form a cliff, about 200 foot. And the walruses were so short a room, they had to go to the top of the cliff. And they were all tumbling off, and he said, that's climate change. And he showed you all these dead animals and so on. Now, what was pointed out to him after that, after it was aired, was the Russians were there as well, looking at those walruses. And the truth of it is this. There are so many walruses and there's so much food there that all the good islands were filled up, just solid with walruses. So they choose the best first, and when they're full, they go to the next one. And this island had a beach, great for those who got on it, but it had this ramp up to the top. And then polar bears don't like fighting walruses. Why fight them when you can scare them, stampede them off a cliff? So the polar bears were stampeding the walruses off a cliff to fall down. Then they went to eat them. So they got killed without a fight. It was lovely and easy work for the polar bears. And that was filmed, actually, by drones. So there are drone shots of this happening. And all this was pointed out to him. In actual fact, of course, the walruses are a huge success story in the Arctic. So and there's so many of them, they're short of room, but not because of climate change. But he would not go back on that. And that's when I lost respect for him at that point. And I'm a man, by the way. I went to the same caves when he actually went inside a cave once to do a shot with his team of glowworms and things and so on. And I actually followed him a few years later without the team and filmed the same sort of stuff, So I've actually followed him. I've actually sailed my boat. I sailed quite a lot around the world. So I sailed to Galapagos and did all those things. I've been involved in all sorts of things. I'm a big environmentalist, and I am an chartered environmental engineer, retired. And obviously, I do a lot of work on the climate, as you know.
I do indeed. Oh, I can't find me now. There to stage. There I am. And I do indeed know the work that he's doing. So it was a lie. And here is what actually happened. Now, trigger warning if you don't want to see this. Okay. Let me play some of this. You can see the polar bears. Is that playing? I don't think that's playing. I'm going to bring that in again, people, because I do want to show you the truth of the lie. Apologies for that. Let me just find it. There it is. I'm going to bring it in again. Because I think it's important to show how these people lie, because actually what Dr. Crockford, Susan Crockford, points out is he used this propaganda to begin an extremely aggressive campaign over the next few years. And he kicked it off at WEF in 2019 with Prince William. And what they did was they did a series of special screenings for the WEF people. And it was essentially backroom deals to push and promote the climate scam. Let me just bring this in again so you can actually see it. There we go. Right. Right, so you can see the polar bear at the top of the cliff. You can even probably make out the walrus as well against rocks. And there's a couple of walruses, I think, at the top there. And now, sadly, the walruses are now falling because they're scared of the polar bear. And oops, I'm going to take it off now. And that was it. And then it's really awful stuff. And they end up in heaps and piles at the bottom. But the story that Attenborough told everybody was because they were forced to congregate in a small space. Girl on Fire says, pretty sure these eugenicists have lots of offspring. They just don't think their rules apply to them. True. It is horrible, Shin. Horrible. Artisans said polar bear population is thriving. They multiplied, and that is backed up by Susan Crockford, who's been studying polar bears for decades. She sees Attenborough as absolutely a big problem. She said he used this horrifying imagery of walruses falling down a cliff to jumpstart a 3-year campaign against human-caused global warming. It included 10 documentaries laden with groundless climate emergency messaging. That's what he did. He used that at WEF. They launched it at WEF, and that was in January 2019, and that was with Prince William, much publicized. And that was, you know, I mean, it's essentially they're in collusion against us. That's where that's the reality. And so they're not averse to lying. And also, to go back to what I said before, there has long been questions about the cutesy nature of Attenborough and animals. And I just wonder whether we had an insight into who David Attenborough truly is around animals with this issue of the Radio Times. Now, this was, I believe, in 2019. And as you can see, a special souvenir issue. And it's, as you can see, he's there with holding a lion cub. And people who know anything about lion cubs were in uproar, absolute uproar. And so, first of all, the questions were, why was he so misinformed that holding a lion cub was a responsible thing to do or acceptable for a photo shoot? Why was this lion cub in this position? Why did this lion cub look so distressed? And there were lots of questions that were asked by actual activists who are out there in Africa. And I picked up a number of the questions that were asked of it. And it said lion cubs are bred in their thousands every year, particularly in South Africa, where they are bred and sold into the canned hunting industry. As a result, thousands of tourists and volunteers travel to South Africa and other areas around the world to pet and play with cubs, to care for them. The US also has a huge issue of cub petting big cats. And it goes on to say, and the research is, the reality is that David Attenborough tried to make it, look, it's me facing a lion cub and everything's lovely. But he doesn't tackle the real issues. And that is, cubs are ripped from their mothers, often days after birth. The females are forced to breed again and again. It's like industrial scale breeding. Almost immediately that the cubs are ripped from their mothers, they are used as a tourist prop, just pretty much like this image from, you know, somebody who's so associated with loving animals, right? And when they're old enough, they're sold either to zoos or largely to canned hunting. This is a constant cycle for these lions and big cat cubs. And by him displaying such an image, people have pointed out it is both naive and irresponsible. But is it because he doesn't actually really know about animals? He's just rocked up, said a few words into cameras and posed for these beautiful photo shoots. Is that the reality? And people came out, they said that he was naively promoting a seriously unethical practice of cub petting. He's promoting hands-on interactions. And they said that it brought his reputation into disrepute, that he was carrying out such an unethical practice. And he did come out and admit that it was wrong, but he was prepared to do it. It's not a beautiful picture, Nikki. He was prepared to do it. And the Radio Times, it should be noted, is essentially the publication that's produced by the BBC. So it's really shocking stuff. And it was an unethical cover. It was an unethical cover by a man that is largely associated with loving animals. It was ridiculous. And a lot of people just said this just continues the chain of selling these animals into the canned industry. And there was an issue because it turned out that this cub had been supplied by some deeply problematic and unsavory people within the industry. And then he came out and the production team came out and said, oh, we didn't know and blah, 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 blah. Well, that's what due diligence is you're supposed to check before you do these kind of stunts. Because the cub used in that photo shoot was from a facility in South Africa that had historical links to the canned hunting industry, which is where lions are bred in captivity to be shot by trophy hunters. And once you're awake, you can't go back to sleep, King. No, you can't. Why not with an adult boa constrictor, said Herbert. Interesting. So yeah, so I don't always think that the great, animal lover has always been so knowledgeable about animals either. And a lot of people said that they really loved his early work with animals and his early work with kind of conservation, and they don't so much love his latter work with climate change. But when you kind of look at it in the whole, in the round, and you start to look at some of those pictures like a sedated polar bear, stuff like that, you have to wonder how many of this imagery is not in the wild, has been staged for mass consumption. Now, the thing about Attenborough is he also talks a lot about kind of this anti-capitalist stance, and it's very much from a you will own nothing and be happy kind of WEF perspective. It's that stable of thought, because the thing about people like David Attenborough is he's resided much of his life, as I say, at the upper end of the food chain. And he's lived in Richmond, an extremely wealthy borough. I'm not wealthy. We just happen to have been able to find a really decently priced house in the borough. But he lives in far more kind of splendid surroundings than us, even though I love our little house. And according to records, he's lived there 70 years. You don't have a very nice house in Richmond, southwest London, unless you got some dosharuni. And he doesn't know poverty. And his anti-capitalist stance is largely built on nice words, flowery statements, zoomed around the world and recorded at one corporate bash or another. He also has lived very, very comfortably off the license fee paying public for years in that bastion of immorality at the BBC. He's a staunch defender of the license fee. Of course he is, because he's benefited from it. And the BBC has faced criticism for accepting funding for his films from environmental charities, specifically the World Wildlife Fund and the Royal Society for the Protection of Birds, because they're using money from groups involved in political lobbying. And it's compromised. It compromises the so-called impartiality of what is supposed to be a public service broadcaster. So he's had some dealings like that. He's also been often criticised for high production costs. And that even when staff have been let go, when there was a 2-year freeze on the BBC license fee, they were still outlaying millions of pounds on his production. Because remember what I said before, and that is the producer said essentially what David Attenborough wants goes at the BBC, and it was ever thus. And that is the reality. Overpaid, says George, overpaid and over here. And again, he's been accused of fake news, actually, and about how there is a real inaccuracy in what he's doing. He's been accused of doing it for money. Of course, he's that's just it's an accusation. It doesn't mean that it is evidence, and I certainly couldn't evidence it. And he's been accused again for money of the exploitation of images and of scamming the public with this imagery. And but nonetheless, he's always been a staunch defender of the BBC, as he would. I went through his company accounts. It's very interesting. You know what? When you've got top-rate accountants, it's amazing that you can essentially reduce your tax bill to almost nothing. And it would appear, according to public records, that his worth is probably somewhere in excess of £10 million. And he's earned that from narrating, from writing books, from producing his nature documentaries. And he famously never learned to drive. He never owned a car. Well, he's probably had the BBC sending him cars to pick him up, because that's what they do. And in fact, one of the biggest bills about 3 years ago for the BBC was the amount of cars that they were having to send out to their staff. I haven't paid a BBC fee since September 2014 and never will again. Jacqueline, more power to your elbow. The man loves awards, mate. He loves it. Loves it, loves it, loves it. And he's always raising money for one thing or another. And like conservation charities, as one example, they raised some money for the Wildlife Trust and Northumberland Wildlife Trust. They There was an appeal for £30 million to buy the Rothbury estate from the Duke of Northumberland's youngest brother. And he raised a huge amount. And his involvement initially almost immediately raised £580,000. And I'm so sick of these very establishment wealthy types constantly asking us to part with money for stuff that essentially should either come from the businesses or should come from tax we're paying. They want us to pay out all ways. My like is stuck on 13. I see. Right. And I also really deplore the establishment takeover of science, and it includes such people as him, of course, and like Professor Brian Cox. This is absolutely the establishment takeover of science, and they've been together before discussing Darwin and other things. And somebody mentioned Freemasonry earlier, and I always say you can't be that close to the royal family without being a Freemason, because the royal family is a hotbed of Freemasonry. And he is actually on a list of famous Freemasons, but I cannot confirm whether it's true or not. It says he's a member of the Newbury and West Berkshire Lodge. And again, the thing about the United Lodge, kind of the headquarters of Freemasonry in the UK, is they will neither confirm nor deny who are Freemasons. And I also briefly referred to the Epstein files earlier, and based on much of what we've seen, I couldn't really trace much to do with him in terms of the Epstein files. However, the Earthshot Prize, which he's been very involved with, which is Prince William's thing, has been reported to the Charity Commission because there are interesting revelations linking the charity's founders to Epstein and the Epstein files. And the Charity Commission said on Wednesday, we are aware of concerns about sources of funding to the Earthshot Prize. We are assessing this information to determine any next steps and if there is a role for the commission. Well, wouldn't it be a turn up for the books if Jeffrey Epstein, now recognized as probably one of the most famous trafficking men in the world, wouldn't it be interesting if he funded the Earthshot Prize, of which of which Attenborough and Prince William both were able to make a series of documentaries? Imagine if it's Jeffrey Epstein who's funded those documentaries. Highly possible. Colin said, I was telling people 1 year ago, 1 year before COVID, you see nothing to what's coming if you don't collectively wake the F up. Call me what you like from an ex-soldier. You sound awake to me, Colin. That's what I'll call you. And Boaty McBoatface reckons that Gates is probably funding. Highly possible too. There are associations. But yeah, it's not impossible. It's not impossible. And so I think that probably is very likely after the Charity Commission. That might be the next royal issue to be investigated by the police. Interesting, right? And cripes, Caroline, right? Absolutely. And Brian Cox, more than likely. What's that? Anyway, of course, where would any self-respecting pawn of the establishment be without having played their part in C19? And this man, of course, is no exception. During C19, he used his platform to reflect on kind of like humanity's relationship with the nature. He and Greta together, they said that COVID-19 was a threat to the environment, again, invoking climate alarmism based on a hoax. I mean, honestly, I think that in about 50 years' time, they're going to look back on us and say, those people were dumb. They just accepted so much. What was that? And one big club, says Markison. You know, the thing is, these people, they like to set themselves up as heroes, don't they? That's what they do. And so, yeah, he and Greta together, they did this kind of virtual wildlife film festival. They said that COVID-19 pandemic was a threat to the environment and we needed to do more about that. And he very much promoted the jab, the experimental jab. Stephen said Dawkins pushed jabs too. Imagine Andrew and Mandy in the same prison cell. God, you're taking me somewhere now. And of course, just in reference to his days at LSE, he's an absolute favourite of the Fabian Society. And the Fabian Society is essentially what's running the UK right now, certainly what's running England. Fabian Society was formed by people like George Bernard Shaw. They were very much interested in eugenics and depopulation. And they also formed the LSE, London School of Economics. And the Fabian Society regularly quote him. And the thing about the Fabian Society, their logo used to be a wolf in sheep's clothing, but they got rid of it because obviously they realized that it kind of spoke too loudly about what they were about. And they do things by stealth. So the whole idea is that they do things in an imperceptible way. So we can't necessarily see the changes taking place. But anyway, Keir Starmer and all of those are absolutely influenced by the Fabian Society. And the Fabian Society love up David Attenborough. They quote him on a regular basis. And do you know who else was at London School of Economics? George Soros. Yeah, he was there too. Anyway, so the Fabian Society, as I say, they regularly quote him and they talk about how he's saving the planet, him along with Extinction Rebellion and others. They are dealing with our climate crisis, and that's a really big one for the Fabian Society. The Fabians are covert now as they got caught out. Oh, as the secret societies when you get down to the bones of it. I mean, that is the reality, Bob, is that what I often say is that these organizations aren't so much secret societies as secretive societies, because we know they exist, right? But what goes on in there is, you know, kind of like what goes on at Fabians stays at Fabians. Anyway, I think I really just kind of happy to be on Earth Day, half a century. Well done. Who's half a century? Is it your birthday? Wait, is it Shin's birthday? Squidgy said, Alex, Soros is far worse than the dad. Well, the younger ones are often become more radicalized, don't they? So I really want to just kind of say all that. We live in an inverted world where the malleable are hoisted to great and incredible heights, where the saints are portrayed as the sinners and ejected from the world hearing what they have to say. So David Bellamy is a perfect example of that. I believe what David Bellamy was saying was absolutely well-intentioned and probably much more scientifically backed when we drill down on it than what Attenborough has been pushing. But the reality is that David Bellamy was never going to do what David Attenborough was prepared to. And that is, Attenborough has always been a tool of the British establishment. Latterly, he has become a tool of the globalist establishment. You know, once a shill, always a shill. And the truth is, he and his type, they want less of us. And to achieve that, he and his handlers, they will tell barefaced lies about the natural world they are filming on our money. They document the ravages of nature. They film it with the absolute desire of terrifying us and saddening us into being part of a lying green net zero agenda. And Sir David Attenborough has been proven over and over to be a liar in the cause of climate alarmism. As I said at the start, he's a titan in the world, and particularly in British broadcasting. I've had journalists tell me it's career suicide to criticize him. One said I would get less pushback if a video surfaced online of me kicking a kitten, because David Attenborough has been and remains untouchable. He's been revered by broadcasters, royalties, politicians and media. No wonder he has believed for decades that he could walk on water. Well, today I hope I have contributed some way to my bit to pulling the rose-coloured spectacles off the world. I think his early work was sensational, but now with the benefit of hindsight, I'm not convinced it was quite as legitimate as we were led to believe. And you know, as I say, given how much we now know about the practices of the BBC, and please also be aware that he has been at the BBC throughout all the time that we know about where all the problems were occurring. Now, of course, I'm not linking him to the likes of like Jimmy Savile or whatever, but he had a major role at the BBC, and there was a certain culture at the BBC, and he's been there. You're very welcome, Aurora. So Attenborough did what a more honest bloke wouldn't do. Attenborough promoted to megastardom, while David Bellamy was dumped from all media, ejected for having the wrong thoughts on climate change, and never to appear on BBC again. And but the reality is, Attenborough in 2004, for whatever reason, I don't believe his official reason, but for whatever reason, he suddenly decided that he was going to push code red on the climate alarmism, and that's what he's done ever since. And it's really appalling. He actually has power and influence. He could have achieved more to clean up our environment and make it safer for animals. That's what he could have done. And his influence is so huge that the UK government, as I say, they announced new plastic recycling policies within days of the final episode of Blue Planet 2 airing. So that's significant. But then, of course, what happens, they get rid of us getting free carrier bags, and we end up having to pay. So it's just ridiculous. It's just ridiculous stuff. And I just feel that he could have done so much more of real value. I find him to be quite a dark character. And of course, when he leaves this mortal coil, he will be feted and treated as a saint and as a hero. He will be canonized. That is the reality. And I'm in no doubt whatsoever that Sir David Attenborough's climate alarmism, as I say, is directly linked to his desire to depopulate the world. And the question is, for what reason? The world is plenty big enough for everyone. If people didn't choose to congregate in overcrowded cities and ghettos, and if the resources and profits were more evenly distributed, why isn't he addressing those issues instead of all these flowery expressions all the time? And if you grew up in the UK after the 50s, David Attenborough was the voice of the BBC. Everything that you associate with that organisation, as I say, can apply to him. The insufferable arrogance of rich folk ruling over our broadcast airways for decades, and for what? He has said lots of nice things that have led to great headlines such as "Give women their own power." But what has it ultimately amounted to? His friends, such as the royals, continue to get richer and fatter off the land, while the rest of us are struggling financially and being penalised to spend money on the fake Green Deal that he pushes. He is part of a drive to bankrupt the country. His love of animals and treatment of them remains questionable. And the fact that he adores, as I say, the bloodthirsty royals as much as he does, tells us really everything we need to know. They are all virtue signalers together. It's just outrageous. He is a charlatan. And that's how I want to leave it today regards him. And I don't bow at the altar of David Attenborough. And I know I will get pushed back. I await to see what awaits me in my email inbox, because people get really upset when you criticize David Attenborough. Really upset. Evil grifter, says Jacqueline. Well, yeah, I think that people like him are the very epitome of grifters, actually. And I just want to say, first of all, thank you always to my wonderful donators. I very, very much appreciate you supporting me to do these things. They're not always easy and there's a lot of work involved, but I do really appreciate you. And I also want to just point out that today is actually the day that astrologers have referred to as the Great Reset. Actually today, right? February the 20th, a rare and significant astronomical and astrological event occurs. It is the Saturn-Neptune conjunction at 0 degrees Aries. And this is the most incredible planetary alignment. We haven't had this for decades. It's the first time actually that these two planets have met since 1989. And it's going to get very interesting. I think that this is a time of great change to such a degree, as I say, that astrologers are referring to this as the true Great Reset. And I like that. No need for this, says Thunderous One. Maybe stop it right now, Thunderous One. Anyway, I think this is a powerful day, and I think it was a powerful day to cover a very powerful topic. And that powerful topic is an absolute god of broadcasting worldwide. And as I say, I hope I've done everything I can to contribute to opening people's eyes just a little bit wider about the problems of him. Do not consent any longer. My rose Boaty McBoatface says, thank you, enjoyed this deep dive. My rose tinted specs were ripped off long ago for David. Have a fab weekend. Thanks very much for this. Really enlightening, says Valerie. You're very, very welcome. Thank you, Colin. I appreciate you all. Yes, Thunderous One, I am a free speech advocate, absolutely, which is why I just read out your comment, right? Read out your comment. And free speech extends to me. It means that I can come back and say, I'm going to say this, right? Free speech extends to me as well. Lots of love to you all. Thank you so much, Artisan. I truly appreciate that. I do the very best I can. I give it my best shot. I try and bring every piece of information that I possibly can, everything I've learned from being a journalist over the years, and try and apply that to all of this so that I'm not creating more alarmism about these people, so that I'm not defaming them, that I'm not setting myself up for any kind of legal challenges from these people, but just to tell it how I see it. So yeah, from my perspective, the Great Reset potentially starts today. Take good care of yourself. I will see you on Monday. And Shin, if it's your birthday, happy birthday, girl. And take good care of yourself. The Great Reset, powerful watch and see what they do, says Pickles. Thank you, people. Love to you, Gwyneth. Lots of love to you. I will see you on Monday. Lots of love all. Take good care of yourself. Thank you for being here.